Welcome to Trust Talk. Our guest today is John Blakey, author of Force for Good, who joins us to discuss the transformative power of purpose-driven leadership. In this episode, John explores how leaders can move beyond a profit-focused mindset to embrace a purpose-centered approach, fostering trust, resilience, and deeper connections within their teams and organizations. We dive into practical tools for aligning leadership with core values, creating authentic and inspiring visions, and addressing the unique challenges of building trust in a skeptical postmodern world. Drawing from his leadership model, John provides actionable advice for leaders seeking to navigate complexity, motivate their teams, and leave a meaningful impact. Your host today, Severin DeWitt.
John, welcome to Trust Talk. Let's start with the title of your new book, Force for Good. Was the title something you came up with before or after the new Prime Minister used the phrase, politics can be a force for good?
Great opening question, Severin, and great to be on the show. Yeah, when I first heard Keir Starmer use that phrase, which was part of his first speech on the steps of number 10 Downing Street, I nearly fell off my chair because certainly the book had been titled Force for Good for many, many months prior to that. I didn't pay him anything to say that. It was a very
good advertisement.
Yeah,
right?
It was a very happy coincidence. But I think it reflects, Severin, that this is in the air at the moment. That purpose and being a force for good, it's in the air. It's in the zeitgeist a little bit, and there are a number of people talking about it, and I happen to be one of them talking about it in my own way. Actually, the title of the book was more directly inspired by the B Corp movement, whose strapline is making business a force for good. That was a very deliberate connection that I wanted to make as part of the title of the book, because it's partly written for B Corp leaders or aspiring B Corp leaders, but it's also written for other leaders who are pursuing purpose in different sectors.
Before we dive into the details of your theory, I'd like to touch on something we see quite often. The focus on shareholder returns is a central theme in many TED Talks, leadership courses, management studies. How do your ideas challenge this traditional approach and reshape the leadership landscape?
I think to answer that question, I'd like to refer to a model that many of us will be very familiar with, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which has often been taught as a model that describes human motivation and how we progress through different levels. We start with that survival, a life of survival, looking after those basic needs, food on the table and a roof over the head. But then we move into that life of success, self-esteem, money, a sense of belonging. I think the world of profit lies at that level in the hierarchy of needs. But beyond that, the hierarchy goes further into what I would say is a life of significance and a life of purpose, where people are motivated by achieving their potential and also honoring their intrinsic values. So I think part of our migration over time in certain societies is to recognize that success and profit isn't the end of the game. It might actually be the start of a new game, which is moving into purpose and being motivated by potential and by values.
In many of my interviews with trust experts, leadership is a topic that comes up repeatedly. So often, in fact, that if I were a CEO, I might feel like I can't see the forest for the trees anymore. But today I want to explore the perspective you've set out in your book, where you advocate from what you just mentioned, from shift from profit-driven to purpose-driven. So how does the shift help leaders cut through the noise and truly build trust?
My previous book, Severin, as you know, was titled The Trusted Executive, and it had in it a model of trust building which had 9 habits. And one of those habits was the habit of evangelize, which is an English word that means spreading the good news. Basically, great evangelists have an inspiring vision, and they're able to communicate that vision in a way that motivates other people to follow them. And so where I think purpose-driven leadership fits into trust is that purpose is a higher vision than profit. And if you are a leader who can articulate and be authentic about a purpose-driven mission, then that is going to be part of what builds trust. I mean, it's not everything, because there are 8 other habits in that model of trust. But actually in the research, the habit of evangelizing was the second most important habit out of the 9. The most important habit was being honest. But the second most important habit, particularly the more senior you are in an organization, is the habit of being a great evangelist. And I think purpose driven visions are what a lot of people in a modern society want to hear from a leader if they are going to commit their discretionary effort to that leader and to that organization.
You just mentioned Maslow's pyramid. That's from his 1954 book, Hierarchy of Needs. And as you said, it outlines different levels of human needs, from basic needs like food and shelter to highest level self-actualization. And you suggest that traditional businesses have been very effective at appealing to the lower levels, the physiological and the safety needs. For example, advertising often makes us feel safe, connected and successful. But what happens when we have achieved those things? What comes next?
A part of Maslow's hierarchy was that once you've fulfilled a certain level, you then move to find motivation in a different way. And I think we do have societies now, particularly in the West, that have achieved a certain standard of living where some individuals in those societies are saying enough is enough. We have what we need in terms of a life of success. And where do you go from there? I think to get stuck at that level is actually pathological. I think there's a point where it doesn't serve you or anybody else to continue to try and look for your motivation at that level. What serves you and other people is to be part of what Maslow called the growing tip. He described that there's 1% of the population that is motivated at level 5 and level 6 by self-actualization and by honoring intrinsic values. And so I think the challenge, and part of the challenge I'm putting out there with the new book, is, are you part of that 1%? Do you want to be part of that 1%? Because we need that 1% to show us the way to move from a life of success to a life of significance. And I think there are a lot of leaders ready to do that, but it takes courage. And also, you need a bit of guidance, and you need some role models, and you need some equipment to help you get to those other levels.
One of the frameworks you mentioned is the up, in and out framework. You emphasize purpose, self-management and leadership. Can you share some practical examples of how leaders can apply each of those dimensions, so up, in and out, in their daily work to build trust and lead effectively?
Yeah, so the up, purpose-driven leadership, is about identifying your purpose, staying connected with your purpose, and feeling the joy of that purpose. The in is about taking care of your own motivation, your own resilience and well-being as you go on the purpose-driven journey. And the out is about how do you bring people with you to be part of the community that pursues that purpose. In terms of practical examples of tools and techniques that a leader can use in each of those 3 dimensions, I give you 3 examples. I have a Thrival kit in the book with 19 different approaches, but I can mention maybe 3 of them here, one for each of those dimensions. So in terms of the up, I talk about a daily purpose connect that a lot of the leaders that I work with, they will, during their working day, connect with their purpose in some shape or other. The way that a number of them do that is by keeping a journal. And the last thing they do on an evening is they complete that journal. But the journal isn't about what happened during the day. The journal is about communicating with purpose, what happened that was purposeful during the day, and recognizing and being grateful for those things that were connected to purpose, and then committing to things tomorrow that will also be committed to purpose. So that's an example of a daily check-in. On the in of purpose-driven leadership, there's a weekly routine that a number of my clients will use, which is about honoring their values. So they will list their values in their app, and they will look at their diary, and they will ask themselves the question, how am I honoring my values this week? And they'll do a map between their activities and their values. So if one of their values is courage, they'll be looking in their diary for anything that honors that value. And over time, looking to build more activities that honor their values, because that's part of what will fuel that purpose-driven motivation and resilience. And finally, in the out of purpose-driven leadership, one of the things and techniques, again, a daily technique that I encourage leaders to use is random acts of kindness. So for people who are looking to follow you, there is the big picture purpose and vision that obviously is part of what motivates them. but they also want to know that you are connected with them at a very personal level around their needs, their daily concerns, and showing that empathy and compassion through random acts of kindness, small, tiny, noticeable things that can make someone's day. And that's what over time can build that bond that when times get tough, they stick with you, they stick with the purpose because you've invested in that personal relationship. Those are three examples, Severin, of different habits, different tools, whether it's daily, weekly, monthly routines, that over the time can help leaders thrive in this role as opposed to feel like they're just surviving and holding on.
You suggest that postmodern skepticism, especially among younger generations, leads to the belief that leaders are guilty until proven innocent, where they're profit or purpose driven. Do you think this mindset makes it harder for leaders to create a more positive and trusting environment?
Yes, definitely. I think, when I entered the workforce many years ago, if I introduced myself as the boss, then the default position was that people trusted you because you were the boss. Not everybody, but that was the default position of, I suppose, respect. I think in a postmodern world, the default position is that when you introduce yourself as the boss, the default position is, I don't trust you because you are the boss. That respect has gone into reverse, where now it's a cynicism and a skepticism around anybody who puts themselves in a position of authority. So I think leaders start with a negative balance in the trust bank. And that means they have to work even harder to prove that cynicism wrong. And so, yes, I think in a nutshell, it is harder. And therefore, leaders need to be more intentional about it. They need to be more conscious about what works and what doesn't work. And this is where I hope the work that all of us are doing in this space over time is helping build that roadmap more clearly for leaders.
You also mention booster packs, I think you call them, like catching people doing things right, saying no to distractions and taking time to recharge. How do these small but powerful actions help leaders stay energized and build trust with their teams?
Yeah, booster packs. I think energy is a very, very precious thing, isn't it? I think in lockdown, in the pandemic, I think we probably all, maybe for the first time for many leaders, became aware how precious our motivation and our energy is, and that we need to protect it. We need to treat it with care. And little things like saying no, and many of us have been brought up and conditioned to say yes. But actually, sometimes saying no is the bravest thing to do, both for you and for the purpose. There's a quote I think I use in the book about it's easier to say no when you've got a deeper yes. And the deeper yes is your purpose. Every time you say yes to something that isn't contributing to that purpose, you're saying no subtly to your higher vision. So I think these booster packs are, again, just raising leaders' awareness about the subtle ways in which we lose energy during our daily activities, and therefore little disciplines that can reinforce and protect that energy, because we need it if we're going to go on this purpose-driven journey.
You also talk in your book about anchoring, where you connect a feeling to a physical action, like pressing your fingers together, so you can bring back that feeling later. Can you explain how this works and how it helps leaders to stay positive, especially when things get tough?
Yes, I talk about this in connection with the challenge of feeling the joy of your purpose, because I think for some leaders over time, the purpose can become a burden rather than a joy, because you get disappointments, you get setbacks. And the anchoring is a way of those moments when you have a positive experience associated with your purpose. And I think the example I use in the book is if I deliver a keynote session on trust, which is my passion, and if I get a grateful round of applause afterwards, then I can anchor that emotion. And so I will anchor it with just a connection of my forefinger and my thumb of my left hand. And let's say the day after, something knocks me back and I get a disappointment and I start to think, is it really worth it? Then if I do that, reconnect that anchor, if I use that anchor, and I can use the physical gesture to trigger the emotional response and to reinforce the emotional response. And I think, again, these are just little mind hacks that allow leaders over time to build that greater resilience, to continue to feel the joy longer, because there are days that are bad days and we've got to somehow keep going, and these things can help us keep going down the path.
John, you describe 3 leadership personas in your book: the zealot, the martyr, and the Pied Piper. Or for our Dutch listeners, I think we call them the Rattenvanger van Hamelen. Let's talk about the Pied Piper, those charismatic leaders who can inspire anyone, but might lose sight of their bigger purpose. If someone takes your self-assessment and realizes they're a bit of a Pied Piper, what's the first thing they should do to make sure they're not leading people off a cliff?
Yeah, the suggestion in the book is that we all have a weaker element of these three dimensions, and that if you are strong at the out and the in, but you are weak on the up, then you have that Pied Piper risk that you might be someone who makes great bonds with people and takes care of yourself, but you don't actually know where you're leading people. Now, in terms of recommendations for people who have that profile, and we're all going to have one profile or the other, one of my recommendations would be to look in the book at the 19 coaching techniques that we've been talking about. And some of them are more focused on the up than the in or the out. And the suggestion would be, in the limited time and focus that you've got to take action, prioritize that action on those habits and exercises that will help build the up of your purpose-driven leadership. For example, one of the monthly routines in that Thrival kit is to have an opportunity each month, preferably in a peer group, to share the progress that you're making towards your purpose-driven vision, and to score that progress out of 10, and to talk about the biggest challenge you've got at the moment right now in that process. So doing that once a month in a peer group is going to hold accountability around that aspect of the op of purpose-driven leadership. So the Pied Piper, you would want to encourage to be doing more of that. And maybe some of the other activities and habits, they don't have to prioritize those as highly because they're already naturally strong in those areas.
Maybe it's good to just for our listeners to recall what Pied Piper actually is, what's in the book. Not your book, but Pied Piper.
Yeah, the fable of the Pied Piper, is the Pied Piper was invited into the village, which was overrun with rats, and played the tune that beguiled the rats into following them, and therefore got rid of the rats from the village. But because the Pied Piper wasn't paid by the town leaders, he decided to play a different tune on his pipe, and he led the children into a cave. So it's a bit of a gruesome fable.
Right.
But I think it makes the point of, some people can play great tunes. Some people as leaders, they can play wonderful tunes, but they don't think as much about where they are taking people with that charisma. I just felt it was a phrase that captured that persona.
On a final note in this interview, John, you ask leaders, over the next 5 years, what might be your first step in becoming a force multiplier? If I turn that question back to you, what would be your answer?
Yeah, and that's a great question. I talk in the book about different ways of becoming a force multiplier, which is the idea that you can help other leaders become a force for good, and therefore multiply your impact over a period of time. Now, writing is one of the ways that I hope to be able to do that, and I'd like, God willing, to be able to write another book. So that would be another way of me being a force multiplier. And in a different way, coaching, I work as an executive coach. I get alongside leaders to help them work on these aspects. And that's not as out there as writing a book, but at a personal level, it can equally make a big difference for leaders who are then affecting the lives of thousands of employees. So I'd like to think that I would carry on getting the opportunity to work alongside more leaders who are on this path, and just helping them avoid some of the mistakes and keep going. So those are a couple of ways that I hope that I'm going to do my force multiplication in the coming years.
That's a wonderful strive. I wish you good luck with that. By the way, how is the book doing?
Well, what I'm thrilled about, Severin, is that a couple of weeks ago, I found out the book has been shortlisted as the Institute of Leadership Book of the Year here in the UK.
Oh, great.
So, yeah, really excited about that. There's 10 books shortlisted. So,
exciting. Yeah.
Obviously, still a long way to go. But nevertheless, yeah, it's just great when you've put a lot of effort into something and burnt the midnight oil to get this out there, and you never quite know what people are going to make of it. So it's nice to get that little bit of affirmation that it's all been worthwhile. And that was a huge thrill. And just gives me encouragement to keep going with it.
The thing I liked very much about the book, I have to say, and there is little room in a podcast like this to emphasize that, is that unlike many other management books, you give a lot of examples, practical examples of how you fill in your theoretical basis. That helps, I think, very much, and it's fun also reading. So wish you all the best and good luck with your practice. Thanks for being our guest today, and hope to talk to you soon.
Thank you, Severin. Great to be involved.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of Trust Talk. We hope that you found the conversation valuable and informative. At Trust Talk, we believe in the power of trust to create positive change in the world. If you believe in our mission, we would greatly appreciate your support. You can help keep Trust Talk going by making a donation on our website at trusttalk.co/donate. Every contribution, no matter how small, helps us to continue bringing you thoughtful and engaging podcasts. Thank you for your support and for listening to Trust Talk. We look forward to meeting you again for future episodes.